My dad kicked me out 3 months after my mom died of cancer to give my room to his stepdaughter, but when he tried forcing me to sign papers, I discovered my mom left a secret will, and now he never expected the consequences. I'm 19 years old, studying at university, and about 6 months ago I lost my mom to cancer, which basically destroyed my world completely. But what happened after, I mean, what my father did after she died, was something I never saw coming, and that still has me processing a ton of emotions I don't even know how to name. I guess I should start at the beginning, when my mom was sick and everything seemed to be falling apart around us. My mom, Susan, fought cancer for almost 2 years, and it was horrible to watch her slowly fade away. I was 17 when she was diagnosed, and I basically went from being a normal teenager worried about school and my friends to becoming a full-time caregiver when I wasn't studying. My father, Stephen, worked all day, or so he said, and I stayed with Mom, gave her her medicine, accompanied her to her treatments when he couldn't, which was often. Looking back, I should have noticed it. You know? The signs were there. Like he'd come home late. He always had. Excuses for not being present, his phone would ring at all hours and he'd leave the room to answer. But I was so focused on Mom, so desperate for her to get better, that I didn't pay attention to anything else. When Mom died, it was in April, I think, or maybe early May. I don't remember exactly because those days were a complete blur. I remember the funeral. I remember my Uncle George, Mom's brother, hugging me while I cried. I remember that my father was there but absent, you know, physically present but emotionally somewhere else. I thought it was grief, that we all process death differently, and I gave him his space because I was also destroyed and could barely stand. What I didn't know was that my father already had plans that didn't include respecting my mom's memory or giving me time to heal. 3 months after the funeral, just 3 months, my father came home and told me we needed to talk. I was in my room trying to do homework for university because I'd gone back to classes, trying to maintain some normalcy in my life. He sat on my bed and dropped the bomb, just like that, without preparation or anything. He said, "Amelia, I'm getting married again," and I just sat there paralyzed, thinking I'd heard wrong because it couldn't be true. You know what I mean? Not even 4 months had passed since we buried Mom, and he was already ready to replace her like it was nothing. I asked him who she was. This woman he was going to marry so quickly, and he told me her name was Angela, that he'd met her a while ago and that she made him happy. A while ago, he said, as if that wasn't the most suspicious thing in the world. I was in shock, literally couldn't process what I was hearing, and all I managed to say was that it seemed too soon, that we needed more time. He got defensive immediately. Told me I didn't understand how lonely he'd felt, that he needed to move forward with his life, and that he hoped I'd be more mature about it. Mature, he told me, as if I was the one being irrational and not him, the one getting married before a year had even passed since his wife's death. The wedding was small, at the courthouse, and I didn't even go. I stayed home that day, locked in my room, crying and looking at photos of my mom on my phone, wondering how everything had come to this. When they came back, my father brought Angela and her daughter Madison to live with us, and suddenly the house that had been my home my entire life felt completely foreign. Angela was 38 years old, I think, or maybe 40, I'm not sure, but she was definitely younger than my mom would have been. Madison was 17, almost my age, and from day one it was clear that she and her mom were going to change everything. Angela started reorganizing the house immediately, took down my mom's photos from the living room saying we needed to create new memories, changed the furniture, painted walls, basically erased any trace that my mother had existed. I didn't say anything because there was living in a kind of constant shock. Like none of this was real. And at any moment I was going to wake up from this nightmare. Madison acted like the house was hers, left her stuff everywhere, used the kitchen like it was her personal territory, and Angela let her do whatever she wanted. My father didn't say anything, just looked at Angela with lovesick eyes, like a teenager, and I felt more and more invisible in my own house. Then, like a month after they moved in, my father called me to the living room and said we needed to talk again. You know what it means when someone says that? It's never good news. I sat on the couch, the same couch where I used to sit with my mom to watch movies, and my father told me he needed me to move out. Just like that, no beating around the bush. He said Madison needed her own room, that it wasn't fair for her to share the master bedroom with her mom when there was a perfect room available, my room, and that he'd get me an apartment or something. I just stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing, waiting for him to say it was a joke, but he just looked at me with that expression of, "It's already decided. There's nothing to discuss." I asked him if he was serious, if he was really asking me to leave my house, the house where I grew up, where my mom had lived. And he told me he wasn't asking. He was informing me. Angela was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, like supervising the conversation. And Madison was upstairs in my room, you know, probably looking at what stuff of mine she was going to keep. Everything had been planned without me having a voice or vote in anything. My father gave me 2 weeks to pack my things and find somewhere to go, and when I tried to protest, when I told him this was my house too, that I had nowhere to go, he just repeated that it was already decided and he expected me to be cooperative. I didn't fight, honestly, because I was so tired, so emotionally exhausted, that I have energy to battle. I called Uncle George crying and told him what was happening, and he immediately told me to come live with him, that he had plenty of space and that I was welcome for as long as I needed. So I packed my things, my most important things, because I couldn't take everything, and I left without making a scene because I thought that maybe if I left without protesting, my father would eventually realize what he'd done and ask me to come back. How naive I was, right? I moved to Uncle George's house on a Thursday afternoon, and he helped me carry my boxes up to the guest room that was now my room. Uncle George was like 50-something, had been living alone since he got divorced years ago, and had always been closer to my mom than to my dad, which now makes a lot of sense. And that first night at his house, I cried myself to sleep, thinking about how my life had fallen apart so quickly, how I'd lost my mom and now had basically lost my father and my home too. About 2 weeks of absolute silence passed. My father didn't call me, didn't text me, nothing. Angela was posting photos on Facebook of the happy family, her and my father and Madison, like the perfect family, and I didn't even appear in their lives. Uncle George tried to cheer me up, cooked my favorite meals, asked me how my classes were going, but I was like on autopilot, functioning but not really living. And then, one afternoon when I was at university, my father called me like 20 times in a row, and when I finally answered because I thought maybe it was an emergency, he was hysterical. He was yelling at me on the phone, saying I needed to come to the house immediately, that we needed to talk about something very important, and I was confused because this was the same man who had kicked me out of the house without thinking twice. I asked him what was going on, and he just kept repeating that I had to come, that it was urgent, that he couldn't tell me over the phone. I told him I was in class, that I couldn't just drop everything and go running, because he decided now it was important, and he got more desperate, like begging me. We agreed I'd go after my classes, but I was nervous all day, wondering what the hell could be so urgent. When I got to the house, my father opened the door before I knocked, like he'd been waiting for me at the window. Angela and Madison were in the living room, and everyone had weird faces, like worried and angry at the same time. My father took me to the kitchen and showed me a letter from my mom's attorney, and that's when my world took another completely unexpected turn. The letter said they needed to contact me to discuss my mother's inheritance, that there was a will, and that I needed to present myself at his office for the reading. My father was furious, literally shaking with rage, and was telling me he didn't know anything about this, that my mom had never mentioned she had a will, that he thought everything automatically passed to his name. I didn't know anything either. My mom never talked to me about wills or inheritances, and I was as confused as he was. But also, I don't know. There was something about his reaction that made me suspect there was more to all this. Angela was standing in the kitchen entrance again, listening to everything, and she looked nervous, like very nervous, and that seemed strange to me. I went to the attorney's office 2 days later, and my father insisted on accompanying me even though I told him I preferred to go alone. The attorney was an older man, very professional, who greeted me very warmly and told me he'd been a personal friend of my mom's. He explained that my mom had made her will 6 months before dying, when she already knew the cancer was going to win, and that she'd been very specific about how she wanted things handled. My father was sitting next to me, getting more and more tense, and I could feel his anxiety like it was palpable in the air. The attorney opened the will and started reading, and basically my mom had left me half of the house, the complete half. The house was in both their names, my mom and my dad, and she left her part specifically to me, not to my father. There was also a trust fund, like a special savings account that my mom had been building up for years, and that was now mine, but administered by Uncle George until I turned 25. The money wasn't a fortune, maybe like $150,000 or something, but it was enough to pay for my entire university and have some financial cushion. My father exploded. He stood up yelling that this couldn't be legal, that the house was his, that my mom couldn't do that. The attorney stayed calm and explained to him that everything was completely legal, that my mom had been in her complete judgment when she made the will, that she had witnesses and everything was in order. He also told him that any attempt to kick his daughter out of the house or sell it without my consent would be illegal now, since I owned half. The expression on my father's face when he realized he couldn't just get rid of me and keep everything was something I'll never forget. We left the office in silence. Well, me in silence and my father muttering things under his breath. When we got to the parking lot, he grabbed my arm, not hard but firm, and told me we needed to work this out as a family, that I had to be reasonable, that we couldn't let a will destroy our relationship. I asked him what relationship, the one he destroyed when he kicked me out of the house to give my room to his new wife's daughter, and he went quiet because he had no answer for that. The next few days were crazy. My father called me constantly, asking me to come back to the house, to talk, to find a solution. Angela also started calling me, being all fake and sweet, saying they missed me, that the house wasn't the same without me. Pure lies, I could see from miles away. Madison was texting me, saying her mom was very stressed about all this, like that was my problem. Everyone basically wanted me to give up my part of the house or sell it to my father for less than it was worth, and I didn't know what to do. I talked to Uncle George and he told me I had to protect myself, that my mom had made that will for a reason and that I should respect her wishes. He told me that my mom had called him when she was making the will, that she'd told him she needed to make sure I was protected no matter what happened, and that she'd named him trustee of the fund because she trusted him more than anyone. That made me cry because my mom, even when she was dying, was thinking about me, protecting me from something she maybe already knew was going to happen. It was my cousin Megan, the daughter of an aunt on my dad's side, who finally revealed the truth to me. We met for coffee because she'd sent me a message saying she needed to tell me something important. We sat at a Starbucks and she looked super uncomfortable, like nervous, playing with her cup and not knowing how to start. Finally, she told me that the whole family on my dad's side knew he'd had an affair with Angela during the last year of my mom's illness, that this relationship wasn't something new, that basically my father had been cheating on my mom while she was dying of cancer. I sat there unable to move, feeling my whole body go cold. Megan told me she hadn't said anything before because she didn't know if it was her place, but that now that she saw how they were treating me, she felt I deserved to know the truth. She explained that Angela and my dad had met at work, that the affair had started like a year and a half ago, and that basically everyone in my dad's family knew except me and, supposedly, my mom. But then Megan told me something that destroyed me even more. My mom did know. Turns out my mom had discovered the affair like 6 or 7 months before dying, when she found messages on my dad's phone. She confronted my father. There was a horrible fight, and my mom told him she wasn't going to divorce him because she was very sick and needed the health insurance that came from his job, but that as soon as she died, he could do whatever he wanted with his life. What she didn't tell my dad was that she immediately went to her attorney and made that will, making sure I was protected, that they couldn't kick me out or leave me with nothing. When Megan told me all this, I started crying right there in Starbucks without caring who saw me. Everything made sense now. Why my dad had been able to get married so quickly. Why Angela already seemed to know the house when she moved in. Why my mom had insisted so much that I finish university no matter what. Why she'd told me in her last days to always stay strong and to never depend completely on anyone. She knew. She knew what my father was going to do, and she protected me the only way she could. I left that coffee shop and drove to Uncle George's house. And when I got there, I broke down. I told him everything Megan had told me, and he cried with me, told me that his sister had been the strongest woman he'd ever known, that until the end she was thinking of me. He confirmed that my mom had told him about the affair when she made the will. That's why she'd named him trustee, because she knew my father was going to try to manipulate me to get the money and the house. My uncle told me that the reason my mom didn't divorce wasn't just the health insurance, but because she didn't want me to have to deal with a divorce on top of her death, that she wanted her last months with me to be as least traumatic as possible. I decided I had to confront my father. I couldn't just stay quiet knowing what he'd done, what he did to my mom, what he was doing to me. I went to the house without warning, knocked on the door, And when Angela opened it, I told her I needed to talk to my father. She tried to close the door on me, but I was already coming in. And my father came, down the stairs asking what was going on. Madison was in my old room. I could see the door open and my posters replaced by hers. And that made me even angrier. I looked my father straight in the eyes and asked him how long he'd been with Angela before Mom died. His face went completely white, like all the blood disappearing from his face. And Angela froze. I repeated the question, louder this time, and told him I already knew everything. That I'd been told about the affair, about how he cheated on my mom while she was dying. He tried to deny it, stammer something about it not being what I thought, but I interrupted him and yelled at him not to lie to me anymore, to at least have the decency to be honest for once in his life. Angela tried to intervene, saying I didn't understand, that things are complicated, that my father had been very lonely. I looked at her and told her she had no right to talk to me, that she'd been an accomplice in destroying my family, in humiliating my mom in her last months of life. I asked her how she could live with herself, how she could sleep in the bed where my mom had slept, how she could walk through a house that wasn't hers, knowing the pain she'd caused. She started crying, but I didn't care. Honestly, I didn't care at all. My father finally admitted that yes, he'd been with Angela before my mom died, but that he hadn't planned it, that it had just happened, that my mom had neglected him by being sick, as if having cancer was a choice, and that Angela had made him feel alive again, that he hoped I could understand that adults make mistakes. Mistakes, he called them. As if cheating on your dying wife was simply a small mistake that can be forgiven and forgotten. I told him I understood perfectly, that I understood he was a selfish person who only thought about himself, who had destroyed my mom, who had kicked me out of my own house without thinking twice, and that it had all been so he could play happy family with his mistress and her daughter. I told him that Mom had been smarter than him, that she'd seen it coming and had protected me, and that thanks to her I had half of this house and he couldn't do absolutely anything about it. The expression on his face was pure fury, but also defeat, because he knew it was true. I made it clear that I was never going to live there again, that I didn't want anything to do with him or his new family, but that I also wasn't going to give up my part of the house. That eventually we'd have to decide what to do with the property, but that would be on my terms and in my time, not theirs. Angela started to say something about how they couldn't keep living like this, with this uncertainty, and I just shrugged and told her that was their problem, not mine, that maybe they should have thought about the consequences before doing what they did. I left that house and blocked my father's number. Angela's, Madison's, everyone's. Uncle George supported me completely, told me I'd done the right thing, that I didn't owe them anything. My dad tried to contact me through other family members, sending messages that he wanted to fix things, that I should forgive him. But I'm not ready for that, and maybe I never will be. Honestly, what he did didn't just affect me, it hurt my mom in her last months of life, and that can't be forgiven just like that. Now I'm focusing on myself, on finishing university, on healing. The trust fund that my mom left is paying for my entire studies, and Uncle George is the best guardian I could have asked for. He never tries to control the money or tell me what to do. He just makes sure it's well invested and that I have what I need. As for the house, my attorney is exploring options, but I'm not in a hurry. Honestly, I know my father and Angela are desperate to resolve the situation, but let them wait. You know? Let them feel at least a little bit of the uncertainty and pain that I felt. Sometimes I think about my mom and how she had the mental clarity in the middle of all her suffering to protect me this way. She left me more than money and a house. She left me dignity. She left me a way out. She left me the possibility of not depending on anyone who could hurt me. And even though I miss her every day, even though I'd give anything to have her here with me, there's some comfort in knowing that even in death, my mom is still taking care of me, still being my greatest protector. My father can have his new family, his new life, but I have something he'll never understand, the unconditional love and protection of a mother who until her last breath thought of me before herself. And that, no one can take that away from me.